I am so overwhelmed and I need a 30-minute break to go be by myself because I am losing it. What that tells somebody is, okay, this person feels overwhelmed and this is what they need. If we could get more connected to each other, we wouldn't see the health issues that we see. I believe so. Despite what our social media feeds will tell us, there's no such thing as a perfect relationship or a perfect family or a perfect anything. What we are all really craving is connection. Connection is met on the other side of vulnerability. And we have to be able to connect with ourselves, connect with others to feel that purpose in our life, to feel like we matter. I'm going to prove to all of you that I matter.
Welcome back, you guys, to another episode of the Beyond the Scale podcast. I am your host, Katherine, and today's guest is a real treat. I have Jillian Ridell, who I am in a mastermind with, and we talk about all things related to unpacking your grief briefcase, creating connection and purpose in your life, staying in tune with your emotions, and learning how to communicate how you feel and what you need. This is such an amazing conversation that is going to completely change the way you think about your feelings and your emotions and just communicating how you feel and what you need in your life. So before we get into it, Jillian, let me just tell you a little bit about Jillian. So Jillian is a former teen mom who defied the odds to become a valedictorian and certified leading expert in trauma and emergency nursing. She is highly regarded by those who need hope when obstacles seem too great to overcome. As a trauma nurse and the host of the Life Without Secrets podcast, Jillian understands our basic human needs to love and belong. She is passionate about helping people feel more connected by diving deep, getting real, and growing together. Jillian's journey has inspired her mission to help others. Having lived her entire childhood as a secret, she knows what feeling alone and disconnected is like. But she also knows it's possible to overcome even the toughest challenges with resilience, truth, and a supportive community. Through her work as a nurse, podcast host, speaker, and instructor of her 8-week program, Love Without Secrets, Jillian is committed to spreading hope and inspiring others to create the lives that they truly desire. So welcome, Jillian, to the podcast. It is such a treat to be sitting here with you today. And let's just get right to it.
Right around 11 or 12, right? Which is when all of our emotions start coming to the surface from our childhood, but we don't really know where they're coming from or what to do with them. And so I became like this angry child. And so my mom took me into this counseling office, and my mom kind of told her our story. And this therapist was like, she doesn't know that these people don't know she exists. And she's like, no. And so the therapist made my mom tell me that this whole other family that I knew about, I have 4 brothers and 1 sister on my dad's side of the family. And I would tell everybody, because my mom has 3 boys too. So I would go around telling everybody, oh, I have 7 brothers and 1 sister. And this part of my family lives in Arizona and I'm going to meet them someday. But I had never met them. And so finally this therapist, like, you need to tell her. And so she tells me I'm a secret, and that these people don't know about me. And, at that point I was kind of like, not sure what to do with this information. I was like, okay. And you would think like, oh, things are going to get better from here. Like, now the secret's out. She knows she's a secret and things are going to get better. But that actually wasn't how it went. Because I knew I was a secret, I got to start going with my dad in the truck. And so in the summertime, I would go with him in the truck and I would go on these commercial shoots for like Toyota and Chevy because he would haul the cars for them. And so I'd get in the truck, and it wasn't like my dad ever told me like, hey, you need to be quiet when I'm on the phone with my wife because she doesn't know about you.
Yeah.
I just knew like I didn't want to ruin my relationship with my dad. I didn't want to ruin my dad's life. I didn't want to be the result of his pain. And so I would be sitting in the truck and bouncing up and down on the highway, and she would be on the phone, and I would be like sitting in the passenger seat, afraid to chew on the piece of gum I had in my mouth because I didn't want her to hear me. And, I didn't realize it until later, but this was kind of what started to question my worth, right? Like, do I matter? do I belong anywhere? Like, how come, like, I'm not allowed to be in that family? Or how come, like, I'm not worthy enough to not be talked about, you know? And I didn't ask myself necessarily those questions at 12 years old, but it was the ways it came out was me trying to earn my love, like in a man or in a boy, right? And so, you know, in my early teen years, I really struggled with trying to connect with people and trying to earn my love. And so what that taught me was that my needs didn't matter. Um, and I carried that through relationships in my life.
Mm.
Yeah.
That is just that is such a wild story. Like, I I just can't imagine how you processed learning of that when you were 11 years old. Like you
Yeah.
said, I mean, you're going through so many changes when you're in those tween years,
Mhm.
and you learn this, and it's like, are you angry? Are you
Mhm.
confused? I mean, I'm sure it's just like every single emotion. Did
Yeah.
part of you wanna just be like, "I want them to find out, like, I wanna tell them." Like, was any
No.
part of you like that?
No, because, I feel like we all want to, we all want our parents' love, right? We all
Yeah.
want to feel loved. We all want to feel like we matter. And so many times we are like walking on eggshells to make sure that we do matter, that we do are loved, right? And so no, I never really wanted to break that apart. But when I was 17, I ended up pregnant. And so I had my son just like not even a month after I was turned 18. I entered college at 9 months pregnant,
Wow.
and, I remember being pregnant in high school, and these feelings came up again of like, "Oh my gosh, am I worthy? Do I matter? Like, am I good enough?" I had a high school teacher that even was like, "Oh, darn, you had so much potential." And I
Hmm.
was like, "Gosh, like, do I just really, like, not matter?" And I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna prove that I matter, I'm gonna just go to college. I'm gonna prove to all of you that, like, I matter." And so I think, that's
Yeah.
something that a lot of people could probably relate to, right? Like, when we feel these feelings of, we don't matter or we feel unworthy, there's usually 2 common paths we choose. And one of them is addictions, right? And maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's lust, maybe it's drugs, maybe, it's our achievements, right? That
Mhm.
we use to prove that we're worthy. And so when we're achieving, like, nothing's ever good enough, right? Because we are chasing this thing that really is a deeper issue inside of us that needs healing, that we need to go back to in order to know that we are worthy and that we actually do matter and that we are put here on earth for a purpose. And
Yeah.
so I was actually became valedictorian of my college. I got every certification I could as an ER trauma nurse. And I feel good at that. And that built a lot of confidence in me. It built a lot of belief in me. It definitely served a purpose. But what I will say is that, like, the issues I had at the core of me feeling like I didn't matter, I just carried that wherever I went because I never took the time to heal that childhood wound of being a secret. And so I began living that as my life. Like, wherever I would go, I would question if I mattered. And so when I got married, which was not to my son's dad at 18. But when I did get married, I carried that into my relationship as well, right? And so in the beginning of a relationship, and I feel like we can all kind of relate to this, right? Like, we're looking for the guy to, like, take us out on their white horse and solve all of our problems, right? And in the beginning, that's easy because that's what we're trying to do. Like, we're all good at earning each other's love when we want to. And
Mhm.
then, the realness kicks in. And, like, what I say is, like, we showed up with our grief cases. Like, we kind of, like, bonded over our traumas, right? He was abandoned by his mom when he was 5, and I was held a secret until I was 18. And then my dad did eventually tell his wife about me. But we carried these grief cases, and each of them are pretty full. Like, we have a lot of childhood stuff. And even if you aren't carrying a lot of trauma in your grief cases, you're coming from different environments with 2 different people with different upbringings, and you're trying to combine them, like when you get married and you start having children, right? And
Yeah.
so we're carrying these grief cases, and mine weigh about, like, 40, 50 pounds. Like when you go to the airport and you're like putting these briefcases up, they're like, okay, you barely pass in, but you get to fly for free today with your baggage. Thank you, Southwest, right? And like, but we're showing up, and at that point, he's like, here, let me get your bags, right? Like, your partner is able to like carry that grief case a little bit for you, right? Because it's 40 pounds. He's got it. Like, he's a tough guy, and we're all trying to be strong in the beginning, right? And then as you get married, like, we have this baggage, but we don't have any structure on like how to unpack that baggage, right? Like to decide what drawer we're going to put that in, what shelf we're going to put it on, so that when the drawer opens, we actually know what to do with this baggage that we have before we met. And so oftentimes, like in our relationships, we get in and then, things start like falling apart, right? And like the grief case is like getting fuller and fuller and fuller. And if we don't eventually learn how to unpack that grief case, it ends up all over the floor and it looks like a tornado went through your whole entire life. And
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could tell you that like I learned how to unpack that grief case before it exploded, but that wasn't how my life went. It's not how any
Yeah.
part of my life ever goes, I feel like. But it taught me so much. And so I think that what is important is like we have to unpack our grief cases.
Mm.
And no matter how old you are, what you're going through in life, like if you want to have a healthy relationship, if you want to feel like a boss in your business, if you want to show up to your kids and be the mom that you want to be, like we have to unpack this stuff and we have to know what to do with it. And
Yeah.
so I think like the biggest thing, I wish I would have done this work on myself like before I had entered a relationship, but that's not how it went and that's okay. Right? Like I think that more so than anything, we have to praise the progress in our life because there's no such thing as perfect. And, despite what our social media feeds will tell us, like there's no such thing as a perfect relationship or a perfect family or a perfect anything.
Yes.
And I think that like part of me wanting to be vulnerable about that and like teach people like how do we unpack our grief cases? Like how do we start to do that? Is because like what we are all really craving is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And connection is met on the other side of vulnerability. And we have to be able to connect with ourselves. We have to be able to connect with others in order to feel that purpose in our life, in order to feel like we matter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's what I really like to do now. And I think having that lack of connection in my childhood, and then feeling that loneliness then in my relationship and knowing that it actually wasn't coming from, the fact that I had a partner there, but we just didn't know what to do. And so we would avoid it. And so just really diving into that and being able to connect with myself on that deeper level opened up the opportunity for us to connect on that deeper level. And like we both had to do the work. We both had to unpack the grief case. It wasn't just one person. We both have to do that. And so I love now like going back and teaching people like how we unpack that, how we can actually feel connected and not alone. Because loneliness, I believe, is the real pandemic that we are all really dealing with in today's world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to go deeper into how you said that, like, in the beginning, you were trying to prove your worth, and you said that you can do that in two ways. And the first way is like addiction. Like, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, they get wrapped up in addiction. So we get
Mm-hmm.
addicted to, substance or our work, our business.
Yep.
Um, and also how when you met your husband, or when you got married to your father, or to your sons, to the dad, you said that, like, you kind of felt like he was helping you get through that time, like get through that period of grief in your life. But to me, it seems like he almost just served as a distraction. Like he was distracting you from what was really going on internally. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like a lot of women today, we're so busy being busy, and we're carrying around this grief case,
Mhm.
and we have this grief or this trauma, and that we haven't actually really visited it, and we haven't figured out like how to get down to the root of it and fix it. And so it's so easy for us to just put a band-aid on it
Yeah.
and move
Yeah.
on with our lives and just load ourselves up so that we never have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I know for me personally, like, I did that when I started like growing my businesses and having kids at the same time. I was so stressed out, and I just kept adding more to my plate to avoid like actually visiting. Okay, I'm really stressed out. I'm burnout. How am I going to fix this? I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't know how to
Mhm.
deal with it.
Yeah.
What would you tell somebody that is in that season of life? Because I mean, hopefully it's just a season for them. Hopefully they can get through to the other side. But what do you think would be like the first step into like uncovering that and kind of pushing those distractions to the side?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that distractions are the band-aids, right? And I don't know if they're like necessarily always distractions, but I think our core is to be loved. Like that is our core need. It's a basic need. We want to feel loved and we want to feel like we belong, right? And so we will use anything to make us feel loved, and we will earn that love. We will push our needs aside. We will have the distractions. We will have the addictions. Like these are all band-aids, right? That we are just like trying to put over that bullet hole of like wanting to feel loved, but feeling underneath like we don't matter, right? And I see this like with health too, right? Like when we are having a lot of health issues, like I work in the ER, and a lot of times, like those bullet holes are so deep. And even in the hospital, we are slapping band aids over wounds that are much deeper than what we're actually using to cover them up, right? Like we can't fix that deep wound inside of us of not feeling like we matter with somebody else. Like it's a band-aid, like you're saying. So like, yeah, meeting my husband felt like this band-aid over a bullet hole I had. And so for a little while, that band-aid was covering up that deeper wound. And eventually, like the band-aid comes off. And then we are left to deal with the actual trauma of what's underneath there. And so something I would tell listeners to start with is figuring out what are the things that um, renew you. Like we have to take a really close look at who we are at our core, what makes us sad, what makes us happy, like what are the positive emotions in our life? How do we get those positive emotions? What are the depleting emotions in our life? What are those negative things that are inside of us? And what do we usually do in that situation when we're feeling those negative emotions? So I usually have people walk through an exercise, and usually we'll start with the stressors in their life. Like what are the major stressors in your life in this moment, in this month, in this year? Like what are the things that are like causing all the overwhelm in your life, that are causing the stress, that are causing you to be depressed, that are causing you to be sad? What are those things? And I will have people just list them out. Is it the amount of workload you have? Is it because, you have the kids are always needing something and you don't have time for yourself, right? Is it money to pay your bills? Is it you're worried about your job security? Is it a lack of time on your schedule? Is it the housework? Is it your relationship, right? Like list out all the things in your life that are causing you stress. And
Yeah.
then next to that column, I want you to make a column that says emotional response. So look
Mm,
at your stressors and then figure out what emotion comes up as you feel those different stressors, right? So if it's your amount of workload, the emotion might be that you feel overwhelmed, or maybe it's your kids, they're young and they are needing a lot of your time and your energy right now. So maybe that makes you feel overwhelmed, right? And
yeah.
when we list out the emotions, and I'll be honest, as somebody that was never asked about how I felt about anything, another thing that like creates the I don't matter, I had no idea when I started this myself, like what were those emotions? Oftentimes, like, we are so busy, there's so much rushed energy in the world, like talking about distractions, right? Like, we are
Mhm.
so distracted that we don't even know how we feel.
No.
We know that maybe this thing is causing the stress, but we can't even put a name to the emotion that we have because there we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
And so I invite everyone to just sit for a minute and start writing this out. And honestly, I would do this for a month every single day in the morning and in the evening. Start with the stressor. Okay, this is just the first step. We're going to write down the emotional response, print out a piece of paper that has 100 emotions. You can Google it. You can find a piece of paper to print out and put it next to your bedside that has 100 different emotions on it. This is how I started because I didn't even know how to name my emotions in the beginning. And I was really good at that. And as an ER nurse, like we don't sit with our emotions. Like we are moving on to the next thing. Like somebody died. Okay, well, next door needs some help.
Right.
There's no time for that. And so I always felt really good at it. And I didn't realize that was not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so I would take this list of 100 emotions and I would go through it. And oftentimes what we'll find is that there's a motion that usually repeats itself like in those things. There's one that's like a really big negative emotion that you'll find. And then in the third column, so you have your stressors, you have your emotional response, how you respond emotionally, what is that internal feeling? So this is how we're developing our self-awareness. And then next to that column, you're going to say what I do now. So what
Mm,
do you normally do when you're met with this stressor and this emotion and you write it down? And this takes like some time to think through, right? Like this isn't something that you're just going to figure out overnight. Sometimes like you have to sit on this like what do I really do? And for me, what I was really good at was pushing through, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to that, right? Because in the world that we live in, it's really fast paced and there's a lot of rushed energy. And so it almost feels like we're forced to just push through.
yeah.
But that doesn't solve our problem. And so this exercise I like to walk people through in the beginning because we can't change something if we don't aren't aware of where we are right now and what we are doing right now and realize that we need to actually change that.
Yeah, I love just identifying your emotions, and it makes me laugh. It brings me back to, like, my daughter, she's in pre-K, she's 5,
Mhm.
and they have like charts in their classrooms. Like, how are you feeling today? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you frustrated or angry?
Mhm.
And I actually was reading an article the other day how it's like as parents, like we help our kids work through these emotions when they're younger. But then at some point we just stop talking about them and they have to learn how to regulate them, identify them, and what are they supposed to do about them? What do they do
Yeah.
now? We're supposed to learn that on our own, but we just get into the flow of life, and
Mhm.
we probably end up, middle-aged, and we have all these emotions, but we don't even remember how to identify them, what to do about them. And I love the column, what do I do now? Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking about I'm taking notes because I need to do this exercise.
Mm,
And I know so many of
good.
our listeners, like, we all need to do this exercise, because if I made a whole column of things that stressed me out, and then I wrote what emotional response I had to it, a lot of times, what do I do now? It might be that I'm just complaining about it. Like,
Uh-huh, that's another one.
I'm not
Yeah.
actually taking action. And, like, sure, some of these areas I might be pushing through, but I was just thinking of one. My husband and I have been saying we need to get a cleaning person because I hate to clean
I
the
totally feel
house.
you.
Oh my gosh, and it's like my kids move faster than I do, so I'm, like, picking up toys, and
Mhm.
it's not even
Mhm.
that, it's like the baseboards need to be dusted, it's all the things that we don't wanna do. So I'm like, "Okay, stressor, my house is dirty, emotional
Yeah.
response, it makes me angry. What do I do? Complain to my husband about it."
Right? And then what does that do? Then you just get in a cycle.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
cycle.
right. It's just a cycle.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also, like, I'm thinking about our clients at the gym and even me personally, like,
Mhm.
when it comes to our health and our wellness and our mental health especially.
Yeah.
It's like, one of the things that stresses you out is you might know and you might really want to lose 50 pounds. And your emotional response, you're frustrated by it because you feel like you've either tried everything or you don't have time to do anything
Mhm.
different. or you just feel stuck, like you don't know
Mhm.
what to do next.
Yep.
And what do? A lot of times, like we either try something temporarily, it doesn't work, we go back to the beginning, or we just we just let it be, and then
Mhm.
we continue to gain more weight and we're not happy with ourselves. And I love this chart because I would say a lot of us, probably 50% of us do push through, but I would say 50% of us too are just like sitting on these emotions and not taking any action and not trying to fix it.
Yeah, oftentimes, yeah, it's like either a slow burn, they're complaining, they're rehashing, pushing through. Like we're all guilty of it. Like let's just be honest. Like I mean, that's just what society has created for us unless we become aware of it and choose a different path. And so the next exercise that I like to do is bring you back into the positive, right? So this is what I call our emotional playlist. And this is something that, like, I think everybody should have easily accessible, whether it's in your phone or on your bedside table or what have you. These are like it to me, this is like the emotional version of having like that playlist on your phone that like really just is upbeat and like makes you feel like good that day. Like it's what I turn on when I have to clean my house because I don't like cleaning my house either. And so when I do have to do it, I'm like, I'm going to this playlist because I need that extra good vibe to get me going.
Yeah.
But so I want, besides making the list of like what are our stressors in our life and how does that actually make us feel and what are we doing about it, I want to also take a moment to go back to the positive and give an example of a time in your life. Write down a situation where you felt like you were winning, right? So
Mhm.
a situation is like maybe an accomplishment that you did. Maybe you studied for a test that day. Maybe you finished a project that you were working on. Maybe you talked with a friend, and these helped you feel like positive emotions. And so think about all the situations or interactions that have this corresponding feeling of like renewal, like those renewed your soul that day, and take count of those. Like anytime those come up, jot it down in your phone. Like
Yeah.
really take a moment and be like, you know what? That was really awesome. I really enjoyed that podcast with MK. Like I'm going to
Yep.
write that down. Like that made me feel connected. That made me feel um proud. Like so it could be working out, right? Working out. I feel more confident when I'm done working out. Even though I didn't want to do it, I did it and now then I felt more confident about it, right? Um so write down all of these things in your life as you're going through your week that are putting these positive emotions in your life. And then on the next column you're going to write what that emotion is. Okay? So just like we were like, well, what is that negative emotion that you're feeling? What is that stressor causing you to feel? You also want to be aware of like what is the positive things that are going on in your life and what is the emotion that's tied to it, because this allows you to then like bring on that emotional playlist when we're in a moment where like, because we can't just like sit in our negative emotion. Yes, we need to understand how we feel. Emotions are our warning signs. They're there for a reason and they're there to teach us something. They're there to change our direction. They're there for us to learn about ourselves, right? But we can't just like stay in that situation and not do something about it, right? And so how do we get from that negative emotion to actually doing the action that it takes to change, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot of people will tell you like, hey, like if you're just, stuck in this negative thing, you just have to get up and do something. Well, some people are so far into that negative emotion that like getting off their couch that day is too much for them. And so we can't just expect people to go from like a negative to like going out and changing the world. Like that's not reality. And so
Right.
what has to happen is we have to be able to not actually do yet, right? This is going to take us from the negative to the do. But before we can do, we have to bring on the positive emotion. Okay, we have to believe that we can do this. We have to
Mm.
remember that, like, we have felt these negative emotions before, but we've also felt these positive emotions, right? And on the other side of that workout that we're dreading is confidence. On the other side of calling that friend, even though we don't feel like, is connection, right? On the other side of that accomplishment that we're going to create the by checking that thing off our to-do list, maybe it's, doing the dishes that day, whatever it is. On the other side of that, we're going to feel proud, right? And so when we can be in that situation and we're in that negative emotion, well, we can just take a pause and just really take a pause and just focus on your heart. Like, take those deep breaths in, to have that moment of a pause, like, step away from the distractions, step away from the emails, step away from the text messages, and really tap into your heart and listen to your heart and draw in those positive emotions, because that's where they are. They're in our hearts. Our heart is
Mm.
where our higher quality emotions are. It's our intuitive processing center. And research shows that our heart actually sends more messages to our brain than our brain sends to our heart. So if we can let our heart be our guiding resource, when we can feel that love from our heart and send that to our brain rather than letting our brain sit there and dictate every thought and every action that we have, we're more likely to then feel better and be able to get up off that couch and go do that thing that will change our lives.
Mm. I love this so much because a lot of our clients in the gym, they get stuck in this cycle and
Mhm.
sometimes they can't get out of it. And so I think that just remembering things that times that you felt like you were winning, like you
Mhm.
mentioned, like things that make you feel good and what the emotional response to that is can really help someone when they are stuck on the couch and they don't want to show up. Because a lot of times, and I'm sure you can relate, I can, there have been times in my life where I felt really good. Like I loved the way I looked, I felt really fit, I had a ton of energy. And then there have been times where, like, not so much. And when
Mhm.
you're in that period, when you're in that season where you're like, "Oh, maybe I've gained 10 pounds, it's after the holidays, like, I'm just not feeling motivated," you actually need to go back through your phone, find that picture where you looked your best, you felt your best. Close your
Mhm.
eyes, listen to your breathing, like you said, and remember that time where you felt vibrant and alive and you love the person that was showing up, because that's what's gonna help you get off the couch. And I think sometimes we feel, especially as women, where we've like deterred way too far from that
Mhm.
person that we once were. And we just keep talking about her like she's in the past and she's never coming back.
Yeah.
And if we continue to talk that dialogue to ourselves and we continue to speak that, into existence, we'll stay in that. We'll
Yeah.
stay in that state of mind, we'll stay in that body, we won't be able to go back. So I love that. I love, like, let your heart guide you and
Mhm.
just remember times in your life where you were winning. That's
Yeah.
that's so
Well,
great.
emotions are our primary energy drainers. And so, like, if we don't fix the emotion behind the thing that we're doing, like, we're not going to be able to show up the way that we want to, because there are primary energy drainers, right? But emotions are actually are also our primary energy renewals.
Mm,
And so, like, when we know how to bring on, we know when we're in one, right? Like, we're aware of the negative emotion that is consuming us, and we know the positive emotion that will make us get to from point A to point B. We're able to draw that in, then it makes it easier to show up. So I think it's really important to
yeah.
go back to our emotions, and, like, you know, people are like, "Oh, emotions are just emotions." I know emotions are really important. They're the driving force to everything that you're actually doing. And
Yes.
so, yes, you can change your thoughts, but I think that even before you change your thought, if you bring in those positive emotions, your thoughts will change.
Definitely. So we unpacked the grief case a little bit. We have talked
Yeah.
about our emotions. I want to bring it back to a little bit of your story just so our listeners can understand how your life changed from when you were a secret to
Mhm.
then becoming pregnant at 17 years old.
Mhm.
And you talk a lot about how people crave connection, community. It helps give them purpose in life. So
Yeah.
I want you to take us back to how you discovered that and how community became such a big part of your life.
Yeah. Okay, so this is I wish I would have known this like I said before, but I lived my life as a secret until I was 18. And so, that's where I have a podcast called Life Without Secrets, and that's where that kind of stemmed from. But it also came because what I realized was that when we keep secrets, it creates barriers to our relationships. And
Mm,
so, because I was always trying to push through when I had those negative emotions, when I felt like I didn't matter, because I was always trying to achieve so that I could feel worthy, I wasn't actually getting to the core of the wound that I had. And so, those feelings that I was having inside, because I wasn't sharing them with others, they became barriers to my relationship. And a lot of times, like, we can feel this in our marriage, right? Like when we are not fully expressing who we are, or when we don't know who we are at our core, when we lose sight of that, like when we put our life into our kids, right? And we don't know what actually makes us tick anymore, like what gets us really going because we've lost sight of that. Like these are barriers to our relationship.
yeah.
And men are the same way, right? Like they, instead of talking about their emotions, they're going and putting their efforts into work more, right? And so, like, and this not, it could go either way, men or women, right? Maybe it's the woman that does that. Um, but these are just barriers and barriers and barriers that are built on each other. And I call these, they're the secrets, right? Because we're not fully expressing who we are, we're not saying how we actually feel. And in my own relationship, I put my needs aside. That's what I was taught to do from a young age. Like, don't speak up, put your feelings aside. Your emotions don't matter. Protect yourself, earn your love because that's what we really want. We want to feel loved, right? So the way to do that is to just put your needs aside. Well, when you get into a relationship and you do that, what happens is you start building resentment. And so I built the biggest wall of resentment there ever was towards my husband. And what I realized I was doing was he could do 100 things right, but I would see all the ways that I didn't matter because that was the lens that I had learned to live my life through since I was a little girl.
Mhm.
And so we have to really change our baseline. In order to change our baseline of the lens we see our life through, we have to be aware again of like the underlying emotions and ask ourselves the important questions. What am I really feeling in this situation? Why do I feel this way? Have I felt this way before in my life? Right? And this is why I'm telling you to document these things. And is it related to something in my past? Like, when you start asking yourself those 4 questions on any situation in your life, you're more likely to find the truth around the situation. And I unfortunately did not discover that truth. And obviously, when you're in a relationship, it takes 2 people asking those questions. But
Right.
for me, it was like I had built this resentment and he was doing his life and I was doing mine. So like we're not in the same circle. We're running our own circles next to each other, but we're not running a circle together. And so what happened is I actually um I felt like I didn't matter. I wasn't feeling connected. I felt so alone. Like that loneliness I felt on that highway by myself sitting next to my dad feeling like I couldn't even chew my gum, like do I really matter? I felt that same way laying next to my husband in my bed. Like, do I matter? Like, I don't matter. Like, I'm alone. I am so lonely. Like, here I am. I have this person laying next to me in my bed, yet I feel so alone.
Yeah.
And I know that there is somebody listening that totally feels me on that. Like, life is complex. And if we can't learn to connect with each other and become vulnerable, like, what are we doing? And unfortunately, I had to learn this the really hard way. And so when I was in that point, when I was feeling like I didn't matter, I was feeling like I need to just get out of here. I need to get out of my relationship. And for me, that was me seeking validation outside of my marriage. I am not proud of that, but I see that as a person that was so wounded, that was so hurt, that made choices that didn't reflect who she really was on the inside.
Mm.
And that's when the tornado erupted and the bags flew everywhere. Like, it was literally like a tornado went through our lives. And eventually, when all that came out, it was like the end of a tornado when all your baggage is literally thrown around everywhere. And at that very moment, we get to decide, do I want to clean this up, or do I want to take what I have, the little that I have, and just take it somewhere else? And if we don't decide in those moments of our life to sit in that and to actually pick up the pieces and do something about it, to learn something about ourselves, to discover why we actually made those choices, then we're never going to have the relationship that our heart really desires. And so it goes back to, connection. And I realized that, like, what we're all really craving is connection. I mean, connection is the root of so many health issues. Like, if we could get more connected to each other, we and connected to ourselves, like, we wouldn't see the health issues that we see. I believe so. Like,
Mhm.
connection creates a more positive self-image, which decreases our mental health issues like depression, anxiety. It increases our overall health when we feel connected. It lowers our blood pressure. It increases our immune function. It increases our lifespan. When we feel connected, we perform at our jobs better, and which leads to more productivity. When we feel more connected, then we have greater resilience so that we can bounce back when we're faced with adversity. And so, by learning to connect with myself, I learned to realize, okay, this is how I feel, right? So we just did an exercise about how we felt.
Mhm.
Now, guess what we get to do with that? We get to figure out what we actually need, and then we get to verbalize it to the people around us. Because
Mm.
the truth is, nobody is ever going to meet your expectations 100% of the time, ever, because nobody is perfect. And so, in my relationship, like in all my relationships, this could be your friend relationship, this could be your person that you work with, it could be your spouse. When you learn to realize how you feel and what you need in that situation, and you're able to then verbalize it, your relationships are going to grow the way that they're supposed to, and you're going to feel connected. You're going to feel the love that you desire. So I always say, so sometimes I come home from work, right? And I'll say, hey, I have had a long day. I feel super overwhelmed. And what I really need from you is to just sit on the couch and listen. I don't need you to fix anything. I just need you to listen to my day and meet me with some understanding. Okay. And then other times it's, I have been at home with the kids all day long. I am so overwhelmed and I need a 30-minute break to go be by myself because I am losing it. Right. And what that tells somebody is, okay, this person feels overwhelmed and this is what they need. And so it gives people the opportunity to show up for you in the way that you need, because most of the time what we're doing is, like, maybe we are complaining, right? Like, oh, this house is so messy. I can't do this all myself. Like, I just cleaned this up. I walk in the other room and now this is messy, like, and we get
Yeah.
into these cycles of complaining, but it's like, hey, I really would feel productive. I feel productive when I can actually accomplish this task. So, and I know I feel productive when I do that because I wrote it down here that, like, when I clean my house, when everything is in order, I feel accomplished. I feel proud. I feel confident. So I need you to take the kids when you get home for 30 minutes. Go drive them around. Go read them a book. Give them a task, right? And then you get that 30 minutes. And then guess what? Somebody knows how to show up for you,
Yeah.
and you get what you need. Like, when we play this guessing game, like, it drives me crazy, and we still get into the cycle. Don't let me fool you. Like, cuz it's we have to actually pause in order to figure out what we need, and that's what the goal here is, right? When we can sit in our emotions, when we can take that moment to pause and figure out what we need, everything else in our relationship gets better. It's the same thing with friendships. there's like, especially with social media, right? I think that, there's this perception of like, um, oh gosh, she's busy because we posted on social media, right?
Mhm.
Or they see you hanging out with your family and then they start telling themselves stories like, oh, she doesn't have time for me because she is busy working on her business and being with her family. But like that person does matter to me, but in their mind they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to ask for what I need because she's too busy." Well,
Mhm.
that's the lie that you told yourself. You didn't ask what the truth was. Like if we want to have real relationships, if we want to have deep, meaningful relationships, we have to be willing to figure out how we feel and what we need in that situation so that person can actually meet us where we're at. And if we're not doing that in our relationships, then don't expect your relationship to be great. Don't
Right.
expect it to be deep and don't expect yourself to feel connected. Like that's how we feel lonely. When we feel lonely, it's a perception.
Yeah.
And so how do we get out of that? We connect with people, we connect with ourselves, we figure out how we feel, what we need, what's going on behind those emotions. Why do we feel so drained? Well, these are the stressors that are happening in my life. This is what I'm actually doing, but I know that these things over here create positive emotions, and so this is what I really need to do. I'm going to call Jill and I'm going to ask her like, hey, I know you're busy. Maybe that's her thought, right? Maybe I'm not, she doesn't know, but I really need some quality time with a friend because I am feeling really alone lately. I am feeling like I can't get off my couch. And I know that having a talk with a friend is really helpful for me to get out of this. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, well, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I have like 2 hours. Like, let's go on a walk together and catch up.
Yeah.
And then she's like, oh gosh, now she feels like she matters. She's not alone. She's gonna get her cup filled, and then guess what, both of us feel good about that because we're like, I love connecting too, we all do,
Yeah.
but it's like we have to learn to take the pause. We have to learn to know how we feel, what we need, and then build our relationships upon that.
Yes. And it starts with, recognizing your emotions. When you said that you have to first, say how you feel and then communicate what you need. I am not kidding you. 3 hours ago, I was sitting at my counter and my husband, like, he doesn't have a heavy workload today. So he went to the grocery store and he knew I had a podcast and a few things. And he said, what do you need? What do you need from me? And I can't tell you how many times I've been like, I don't know. I don't know what I need. And
Mhm.
I just walk away.
Mhm.
And it's not like, I do it like I'm mad at him or there's like any resentment, but I do get that. I have felt that
Yep.
before where it's like they're doing a million things right and
Yep.
you see the one thing they're doing wrong. So
Yep.
you develop this resentment. And I know our listeners can relate to that. But he's like, what do you need? And that's me just being so busy being busy that I'm not in tune with my emotions and what I'm feeling and how to communicate that. And
Mhm.
so it all goes back to, that communication cycle and how
Yep.
you have to know what you're feeling in order to communicate what you need. And
Yeah.
I think that's so valuable for our listeners because, whether they're thinking about their relationship with their spouse, their significant other, or even like friendships or in the office, I do feel that as women,
Mhm.
we people think, "Oh, we're so emotional, like we have so many emotions." That's true, but also we have a hard time communicating what those emotions are. Like,
Mhm.
we're big feelers, like, we're feeling so many things inside that we can't even put a label on. Like,
Mhm.
we don't know what it is that we need sometimes. And one thing that I love about Fit Body Boot Camp is that, like, when I started as a client at Fit Body before I became an owner, is that I was in a season of life where I felt like I didn't have a lot of connection with people.
Mhm.
I was in, like, my 2nd job out of college. I was trying to, like, navigate learning how to be an adult and, I had just gotten married. I was trying to find, like, new friend groups, and I found a connection with people at the gym that I could communicate with about what was going on in my
Mhm.
life, and we really bonded over what was going on in their lives, and so I formed that connection. So I think that there's just so many areas in our life
Mhm.
that we're missing the boat.
Yeah.
We're missing out on
Yep.
these meaningful connections. And I love how you mentioned, social media and how we create the story,
Mhm.
because I do that all the time. You
Mhm.
see people, you see
It's
like,
really
oh,
common now.
they're out of town for the weekend, like haven't seen them in a while, but they're really busy. I'm not going to reach out because they don't have time for me.
Yep.
And you're creating that. Like you're creating that story that you don't even know is true. So I love
Mhm.
that you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I mean, and awareness is so important too because like there could be friends that you really care about, but maybe they kind of drain your energy, right? Like
Mm,
maybe it requires a lot from you. And so when we are aware of how we feel, we also have to like take care of ourselves and go, you know what? I know that I need to fill my cup today. And so I know that this friend over here is more positive and she really like encourages me and believes in me and that's what I need today. And so maybe that like be aware of like those connections too. Like how do you feel? And why do you feel that way after you connect with that person? Is that person just not on the growth journey that you are? And I think that like, a lot of people talk about like, you know, who you hang out with is who you become. And I do agree with that. um, but I think more important, it's like being aware of like where we're giving ourselves and where we are receiving. And knowing that like we can still give to those people that need us, right? Because like just because they're not on the same growth journey as us at that very moment doesn't mean they don't need that growth journey, right? And that you could be a good example for them. But realize where you're at. And if you're feeling like this week my energy levels are really low, maybe we go over here to this group of people that is really gonna, work you up and increase your energy so you have energy for those that need it.
yes, yeah, I agree 100%. Well, Jillian, we have unpacked so many things today. I think that our listeners are really going to find this episode is going to help them become more aware of what's going on internally. And I hope that they take some time to write down how they're feeling and what actions they've been taking because of how they're feeling, and what actions have they not been taking, and how they're communicating what they're feeling. But before we go, I want to ask you about your podcast, because your podcast is so interesting and unique. It's called Life Without Secrets. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast and where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. So my podcast is Life Without Secrets. I actually started it, an interesting story. So I work in the emergency room, like I've said, and I felt like there was a gap between what I did there and what I felt was actually useful for people. So like in the emergency room, I like critical care and trauma because I feel like I am doing like a purpose there that is helping them get to that next level to go and hopefully go out those doors and live a different awesome life, right? But 80% of the people, I would say, probably maybe even 90%, of people that come into the ER every day are dealing with stuff that is so much deeper than the presenting symptoms that they're coming in for. And so I felt like there was a gap between like what I felt they actually needed, which was like a deeper level of work that they needed to do and to
Mhm.
find that hope and belief in themselves, than like me putting the band-aid over their symptoms, And so it was funny. I actually went to Ed Milet's book launching event and I met Jenna Kutcher there, who also has a podcast. I didn't know her at the time. And we ended up, she had just had her baby 6 months ago. And I was like, and I have 3 kids. And I was like, this was the first time she'd been alone or away from her kids. And I was like, you know what? Let's go out together. Like, let's chat. So we ended up going down to the hotel, like bar area and chatting. We were swapping stories. And I'm telling her, like, it was COVID. It was right after like COVID had started and everything. And I'm like, I just feel like people are feeling so lonely and it's presenting itself even more so in the emergency room. And I feel like I'm just not getting to the core to like really help people. And I'm just not sure what to do about it. And she's like, well, why don't you start a podcast? And she knew my story of being a secret, and I was sharing this with her, and she's like, "You should start a podcast." And I was like, "Well, I never really thought about starting a podcast. Like that never crossed my mind." And she's like, "Yeah, like you should start a podcast." So she sends me her course of how to start a podcast. And that Monday morning, I opened the course and I dove into this course, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this and I want to share people's struggles because, sometimes there's there's this thing of like, oh, you just need to be positive. You just need to change those thoughts, but sometimes like we have to embrace where we are in order to like draw in the positive and move where we need to go, And so a lot of the podcast is sharing like what were those struggles that you went there, because the truth is we are never alone in what we're going through, and we all share the same emotions. And maybe your story is not the same, but maybe the emotion that was behind that story was something you can relate to, like maybe you felt resentful to your friend who didn't show up for you, or instead of your husband. Like we can all like maybe you felt overwhelmed in this situation even though you're not a mom. We can all relate on an emotional level, and I don't think we need to compare like, oh, like your trauma is bigger than my trauma. Like at the end of the day, like we shared this common emotion,
Yeah.
and so we know what that feels like. And when we can relate on that and then listen to that person's story and know like, okay, this person felt this way, they went through this struggle, and then now they're over here. Like I can do that too. Like
Yeah.
there's hope to be found there, and there's belonging. Like if this person has done this in their life and they're doing this over here and they belong, like I belong there too. And
Mm.
so that was really like the hope that I want people to discover from Life Without Secrets, and knowing that like when we can get vulnerable and we can share our stories and where we're at with the world, and it doesn't even have to be the world, but three of your closest friends, we don't have to do life alone. And then when we share that, we're not having all those barriers to the relationships that our heart really desires.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
get rid of the secrets.
Yes, you're, like, offering everyone permission to just be their authentic, true self
Hmm.
and not leave anything behind, because sometimes it's, like, the things that we're leaving behind, like you said, are the things that people can relate to the most,
Yeah.
and you can bond over that. You
Yeah.
can create those meaningful connections when you're just yourself, when you be yourself
Well, and when
and
we
let
share how
people
we really
into your
feel.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so crazy because there's so many people around the world that do this, and it makes me so sad. Like I was getting on a plane a couple weeks ago actually, and this guy was like looking for a place to charge his phone, and some of the other jacks weren't working, and I was like, "Oh, mine's working. Like come over here, you can plug into mine." And so he sits down, and like I'm like, so like, what are you doing here? Or do you live here? I tried getting into his story, of course. And he's like, oh, I own some restaurants up here. And so I come up here every once in a while. And he's like, but I really didn't have to check on my restaurants. I just wanted to be by myself, and I have a house here. So I just told my wife that I went and I'm going to check on these restaurants, but I just really want to sit on the couch and be in quiet and enjoy myself. And I was like, huh. And he's like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I have a podcast. It's called Life Without Secrets.
Oh my
But I'm
gosh.
like, have you ever thought about telling your wife like how you really felt? Like, because you know what? I bet you that like your relationship would become so much deeper, and you wouldn't have to keep running away from the very thing that could actually settle your emotions in the first place. But so many of us do that, right? Like
Yeah.
so many of us like think that all we need to do is get to be by ourselves. All we need to do is achieve this thing. All we need to do is get to this point in our life when we have this, this, and this, and then it'll be fine.
Then we'll be happy. Yep.
Yeah. And it's not true. And when you can just get vulnerable and be who you are and how you feel, and know the tools in your life to move you through on your own, you start to love yourself. And when you love yourself, like you no longer just have to like accept everybody else's love or earn everybody else's love. You can just know that you're loved and be in any environment and know you belong and that you're loved.
Mm.
You
Well,
don't
this
have
has
to
been
escape it.
yes, this is so amazing. I feel like every part of this podcast is just something that our listeners are going to be able to apply to their life. And it's going to really just have them thinking
Yeah.
about their emotions and their lack of connection that they're feeling. Because no matter
Yeah.
what, we're all craving more. We are.
Yeah. Well, and I want to say this too, because I think this is so important, and maybe you've talked about this before, but I just feel like this was so important in my life, is like, especially when you have kids and you're just like in the thick of it.
Hmm.
Like my kids, they normally wake up around like 7. in the morning. And so I always wake up at 6 a.m. and I have that quiet time in the morning. Like we have to prep for our day. And I don't mean just like prep, like get your to-do list ready, but like get your body ready, get your mind ready, like have that time of quietness. I literally sit in the dark every single morning with my coffee, just by myself. And I take that moment to just like take some deep breaths, like, and a lot of people, go to gratitude, like what am I grateful for today? Like, and just having that moment of peace, right? And you can write that down then on your like if you're struggling to find those positives in your life, do something like that. You can write that down. How did you feel after you sat in the quiet and you just sat and just took those deep breaths and just really like focused on your heart for a minute and like stepped away from all the world and your to-do list and just got really still with yourself?
Mm.
Like how did that make you feel? I bet you'll feel more peace. And then you can write that down and you can apply that in times where later on your kids are fighting over their homework and you can sit and go, you know what? Remember that feeling this morning when I was feeling at peace? Like I'm just going to draw that in and like I will literally sit and just take some deep breaths, like, and during homework time is like it's stressful. Like let's just be real. Life is hard sometimes. It's
Yeah.
not always rainbows, butterflies, and positive vibes only. Like it's tough.
Oh yeah. I between the hours of I mean, my kids are little. They're 2 and 5.
Yeah.
Between
Yeah.
between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m., there are moments in my afternoon, I kid
Mm.
you not, I will like pretend I need to go to the bathroom just to sit there
Yes.
and be like, nobody's bothering me. Nobody.
Yes. It's real life. That's real
Yeah.
life, and it's like, it's okay, right? And then just, take some deep breaths, draw on those positive emotions, show
Mhm.
up, and then ask for help when you need it.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, where can people find you and learn more about your podcast and all the great work that you're doing?
So they can go to lifewithoutsecrets.com. They can find me on Instagram. Life Without Secrets podcast is the page that I use the most. I do have a Jillian Ridell page as well. Interestingly enough, whenever we try to do good things in the world, we are always met with resistance. And my Jillian Ridell account that I originally started with 2 weeks before I launched my podcast got deleted off of Instagram. Like Instagram was like, nope, can't have it. So the next day I was like, I'm starting a new page. And so I started the Life Without Secrets podcast page. And so I'm usually in my DMs on the Life Without Secrets page for Instagram way more than I am the Jillian one because I had that one for like over 8 months before I got the other one back. And so I'm usually on there. You can find my podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And yeah, send me an email, send me a DM, connect with me. I'm doing a program if you're interested in building onto your relationship. I'm also doing a program, I'm calling it Love Without Secrets. And we are diving into relationships and
Mm.
kind of using some of these tools that we'll start with, and we'll kind of grow upon those in order to build the deeper connections in your spouse or in another relationship in your life.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I know so many of our listeners would love that because we're always talking about needing advice to connect with our spouse, me
Yeah.
included. Um,
Mhm.
there's seasons in your relationship, and I feel like when you have those tools, if you're going through, a season where you're craving more connection, I feel like
Yeah.
that could be a great resource for them.
Yeah, no, it's great. We've learned the hard way, and I've done the research and the tools, and I see it every day in the ER. So
Yeah.
happy to help.
Awesome. Well, Jillian, thank you so much for joining me. I know our listeners are going to get incredible value from this episode. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, check us out on Apple Podcast and Spotify, and share this episode with all of your friends. Until next time, you guys, thanks so much. Until next time, thanks so much.